The sun was setting over Kyoto, painting the ancient city in hues of orange and purple. The narrow alleyways, usually bustling with life during the day, now lay deserted, their shadows stretching long and ominous. Among these forgotten paths, a lone photographer, Haruto, wandered with his camera, seeking the perfect shot that encapsulated the eerie beauty of Kyoto at dusk. His passion for photography had led him to many secluded spots, but tonight, the air felt different, thicker, as if laden with unseen whispers. Haruto adjusted his camera settings, the click of the shutter echoing faintly against the silent walls. The first few shots were mundane, capturing the fading light against the aged wood and stone. But then, as he reviewed the last photo, his breath caught in his throat. There, in the corner of the frame, stood a shadowy figure, its features indistinct yet undeniably present. Haruto's heart raced as he scanned the alley. No one was there. The sense of being watched pressed down on him, a weight that made his skin crawl. He tried to rationalize it, a trick of the light, perhaps, or his own fatigue playing tricks on his mind. Yet, the more he stared at the photo, the more the figure seemed to stare back, its presence growing heavier with each passing second. The alley, once silent, now seemed to hum with a low, indistinct whisper, as if the shadows themselves were speaking. Haruto's hands trembled as he pocketed his camera, his earlier curiosity now replaced by a primal urge to flee. But as he turned to leave, the whispers grew louder, coalescing into a single, chilling word, his name. The sound was so clear, so close, that he spun around, expecting to confront someone, anyone. But the alley remained empty, save for the deepening shadows that now seemed to move of their own accord. Haruto's flight was instinctive, his feet pounding against the cobblestones as he raced towards the safety of the main street. Behind him, the whispers continued, a cacophony of voices that seemed to follow, to beckon. It wasn't until he burst into the well-lit thoroughfare, the familiar sights and sounds of Kyoto's nightlife enveloping him, that he dared to look back. The alley was just as he had left it, silent, empty, innocuous. Yet, the photo in his camera told a different story, one that Haruto knew he would never forget. That night, and for many nights after, the whispering shadows haunted his dreams, a constant reminder of the unexplained phenomena that lurked in Japan's forgotten alleys. The photo, when he finally mustered the courage to develop it, showed nothing but an empty alley, the figure, and the whispers, gone as if they had never been. But Haruto knew better. Some mysteries were not meant to be solved, some shadows not meant to be illuminated. And so, the whispering shadows of Kyoto's forgotten alleys remained, waiting for the next curious soul to wander into their grasp. Break time equals 5s. Greater than the night was unusually quiet as Hiroshi made his way through the dimly lit streets of Osaka, his footsteps echoing softly against the pavement. He had taken this shortcut through the abandoned shopping arcade countless times before, but tonight, the air felt heavier, charged with an unspoken dread. The arcade, once bustling with life, now stood as a hollow skeleton of its former self, its stalls shuttered and dark, the neon signs that once adorned its entrance long since extinguished. Hiroshi tightened his grip on his bag, his heart pounding slightly faster than usual. He told himself it was just the cold night air that sent shivers down his spine, not the eerie silence that enveloped the arcade. As he ventured deeper, the shadows seemed to stretch and twist around him, playing tricks on his mind. Then, he heard it, a faint whisper, so soft he thought it might have been the wind. He paused, straining his ears. There it was again, a murmur that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. His breath hitched as the whispers grew slightly louder, indistinct yet undeniably present. Hiroshi quickened his pace, his earlier bravado crumbling under the weight of an inexplicable fear. The whispers followed, escalating into a chorus of voices that seemed to echo from the empty stalls around him. They were speaking in hushed, urgent tones, words he couldn't quite decipher but that filled him with a deep, primal terror. Breaking into a run, Hiroshi's heart raced as the voices grew louder, more insistent, as if they were trying to tell him something, or warn him. The arcade, which should have ended after a few dozen meters, seemed to stretch on endlessly before him, the exit nowhere in sight. Panic set in as the whispers became a cacophony, drowning out his thoughts. He stumbled, his legs giving way as the overwhelming fear paralyzed him. The last thing Hiroshi saw before everything went black was the shadows around him moving, twisting into shapes that defied explanation. When he awoke, he was lying at the entrance of the arcade, the first light of dawn creeping over the horizon. The whispers were gone, but the memory of them, and the paralyzing fear they instilled, lingered. To this day, Hiroshi avoids the arcade, and the few who dare to walk through it at night speak of whispers that seem to come from the shadows themselves, a mystery that remains unsolved. Break time equals fives, greater than the air in Tokyo's forgotten neighborhoods was thick with the weight of untold stories, each alleyway a silent witness to the past. Dr. Aiko Tanaka, a historian specializing in urban decay, had spent months documenting these shadows of the city, her curiosity piqued by the layers of history peeling away like old wallpaper. Her latest project had led her to a derelict house at the end of a narrow alley, its wooden frame bowed with age, the shoji screens torn and whispering in the wind. The house stood as a relic, untouched by time, yet Aiko felt a pull towards it, as if it held answers to questions she hadn't yet thought to ask. Inside, the dust danced in the slivers of light that pierced through the broken roof. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the occasional creak of the house settling. Aiko's footsteps echoed as she moved through the rooms, her camera capturing the decay. It was in what must have been the study that she found them, letters, yellowed with age, tied together with a frayed ribbon. The handwriting was delicate, the ink faded but still legible. As Aiko read, her breath caught in her throat. The letters spoke of shadows that whispered, of a presence that followed the writer through the very alleys Aiko had been documenting. The descriptions matched her own experiences, the feeling of being watched, the faint murmurs just beyond hearing, the sudden chills on warm nights. Aiko's hands trembled as she realized the letters were dated over 50 years ago. How could they describe her own encounters so accurately? The rational part of her mind searched for explanations, coincidence, the power of suggestion, the universal nature of fear in such places. But another part, the part that had felt those whispering shadows, knew there was something more. That night, Aiko returned to her small rented room, the letters carefully tucked into her bag. The streets were quiet, the usual hum of the city absent in this forgotten corner. As she walked, the feeling of being followed returned, stronger than ever. She quickened her pace, her heart pounding in her chest. The whispers started as she reached her door, just on the edge of hearing, words in a language she couldn't understand yet felt she should. Inside, Aiko locked the door behind her, the letters spread out on her desk. She pored over them again, searching for something she might have missed, some clue to explain the impossible. The more she read, the more the words seemed to shift on the page, the handwriting becoming more familiar until it was unmistakable, her own. Aiko's reflection in the window caught her eye, but the face staring back wasn't hers. It was older, weary, the eyes filled with a terror that mirrored her own. The whispers grew louder, filling the room, a cacophony of voices all speaking at once, all telling the same story, her story. Aiko screamed, but the sound was lost in the noise. When silence finally fell, the room was empty. The letters were gone, the desk bare. Outside, the alley was just an alley, the house at the end just a house. But Aiko knew the truth now. The whispering shadows had found her, and they would never let her go. The next morning, a new researcher arrived in the neighborhood, eager to document its history. As she passed the derelict house, she felt a strange pull towards it, as if it held answers to questions she hadn't yet thought to ask. Break time equals fives. Greater than the night was unusually quiet as Hiroshi found himself wandering through the labyrinthine alleys of Yokohama, the neon glow of the city a distant memory behind him. The narrow passageways, lined with aging wooden structures and the occasional flickering lantern, seemed to close in around him, their shadows stretching and contorting with every step he took. Hiroshi had taken a wrong turn after leaving a late-night izakaya, his sense of direction blurred by the warmth of sake and the fatigue of a long business trip. Now, the cold night air bit at his skin, and the only sound was the occasional rustle of paper or the distant hum of the city, a stark contrast to the lively streets he had left behind. His phone's battery had died, leaving him without a map or a way to call for help, and the growing sense of isolation weighed heavily on him. As he turned another corner, hoping to find a familiar landmark, the alley seemed to stretch on endlessly, the darkness ahead impenetrable. Then, just as he was about to retrace his steps, he heard it, a whisper, so faint it could have been the wind, but unmistakably his name. Hiroshi. The voice was soft, almost tender, but it sent a shiver down his spine. He spun around, heart pounding, but the alley was empty save for the swirling leaves carried by the breeze. "Hello?" he called out, his voice echoing off the walls, but there was no response. The silence that followed was deafening. Hiroshi tried to rationalize what he had heard. Perhaps it was his imagination, a trick of the mind in an unfamiliar place. But as he continued walking, the whispers returned, this time more insistent, coming from all directions. "Hiroshi. Hiroshi." Each utterance was clearer than the last, as if the voices were drawing closer. His breath came in short gasps, his hands trembling as he quickened his pace, the alleys now a blur of shadow and light. Then, ahead, he saw a figure standing at the end of the alley, its silhouette indistinct but undeniably human. Relief flooded through him, someone who could help. But as he approached, the figure remained motionless, and the whispers grew louder, merging into a cacophony that filled his ears. When he was mere steps away, the figure vanished, leaving Hiroshi standing alone, the whispers abruptly ceasing. The sudden silence was more terrifying than the voices had been. He felt a presence behind him, a cold breath on his neck, and as he turned once more, he saw nothing but the endless alley stretching into the darkness. Hiroshi ran then, his feet pounding against the cobblestones, the alleys twisting and turning until he burst out onto a familiar street, the bright lights and sounds of the city a jarring contrast to the terror he had just experienced. He never spoke of what happened that night, but sometimes, in the quiet moments before sleep, he could still hear the whispers calling his name, a reminder of the shadows that lurk in the forgotten alleys of Yokohama. Break time equals fives, greater than the air in the abandoned village near Nara was thick with the scent of damp earth and rotting wood, a testament to years of neglect. The overgrown foliage clawed at the remnants of what was once a thriving community, now reduced to a ghostly shell. Among the group of urban explorers was Akira, a seasoned investigator of the forgotten, drawn to the village by rumors of unexplained phenomena. His camera hung heavily around his neck, a tool to document the unseen. The initial excitement of the exploration had given way to a creeping unease as the group ventured deeper into the village's heart. The first sign something was amiss came when Akira reviewed his photos, spotting a shadowy figure standing in the doorway of a dilapidated house. The figure wasn't there when he took the photo. The group dismissed it as a trick of the light, but the unease in Akira's gut refused to settle. As they pressed on, the whispers started, barely audible over the rustling leaves. They seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once, a chorus of voices speaking in a language just beyond comprehension. Akira's breath hitched as he caught movement in his peripheral vision, a shadow flitting between the trees. He raised his camera, snapping a photo, but the screen showed only the empty path. The others began to report similar experiences, their voices tinged with fear. The shadowy figure appeared in their photos too, always just out of sight in reality. The psychological toll was palpable, the group's camaraderie frayed as paranoia took hold. They decided to leave, but the village seemed to resist their departure, the paths twisting in on themselves. The whispers grew louder, more insistent. Akira's heart pounded as he realized they were being herded, the shadowy figure appearing at every turn, always just a step ahead. In a moment of clarity, Akira understood the figure wasn't leading them out, it was keeping them in. The climax came when the group found themselves back at the village center, the figure now standing plainly in the middle of the road. It didn't move, didn't speak, but its presence was a weight pressing down on them. Akira's camera clicked one last time, capturing the figure before it vanished. The group fled, their screams echoing through the empty streets. They made it out, but the photos remained, the shadowy figure clear in each one. Akira tried to rationalize it, to find some explanation, but the truth was a gaping void. The village, the whispers, the figure, they defied logic. The experience left Akira with a lingering dread, a fear of the dark and what might be watching from just beyond sight. The photos were deleted, but the memory couldn't be erased. The whispering shadows had spoken, and their message was one of unresolved terror, a mystery that would haunt Akira forever. Break time equals 5s, greater than the air in Hiroshima at dawn is thick with a mist that clings to the skin like a second layer, cold and unwelcoming. The alleyways, narrow and winding, seem to breathe with the city's hidden pulse, a reminder of the past that lingers in the shadows. You walk alone, your footsteps echoing softly against the damp cobblestones, your breath visible in the chill air. The silence is oppressive, broken only by the distant sound of a shutter creaking in the wind. You're here because you couldn't sleep, drawn by the strange stories of these alleys, of shadows that move without a source, of whispers that carry on the wind. At first, you see nothing out of the ordinary, just the play of light and shadow as the sun struggles to pierce the fog. But then, out of the corner of your eye, you catch movement, a shadow, dark and swift, darting across the wall to your left. You turn, but there's nothing there. Just the alley, just the fog. You tell yourself it's just your imagination, the lack of sleep playing tricks on your mind. But then it happens again, and this time you're sure. The shadow moves against the wind, against all logic, slithering like a living thing. Your heart races, your palms grow slick with sweat. You quicken your pace, but the alley seems to stretch on endlessly, the shadows growing thicker, more defined. They whisper now, voices just at the edge of hearing, words in a language you don't understand but that fills you with an inexplicable dread. You run, your breath coming in short, sharp gasps, the shadows closing in around you. And then, just as suddenly as it began, it stops. The alley is silent once more, the shadows still. You're left standing there, heart pounding, the echo of those whispers lingering in your ears. You tell yourself it was nothing, just the wind, just your mind. But as you turn to leave, you catch one last glimpse of the shadows, moving once more, reaching out towards you. And you realize, with a cold certainty, that they were never just shadows at all. The experience leaves you shaken, the memory of those whispering shadows haunting your thoughts long after you've left the alley behind. You find yourself wondering what they wanted, what they were trying to say. And most of all, you wonder if they'll be waiting for you the next time you walk those fog-laden alleys at dawn.